Hey class, welcome back to our history subject and welcome back to American Revolution. Today we are covering chapter 14, the Great Declaration. So if you haven't watched chapters 1 through 13 yet, please make sure you are caught up because these all are building upon each other, and chapter 14 might not make very much sense if you haven't done the previous chapters. Before we get in, let's review what we did talk about in chapter 13. We covered how George Washington was appointed to be the leader of the colonial army. We talked about the battle at Bunker Hill, and how the colonists, the Minutemen, and the militiamen were able to, possibly not win that battle, but they did so good that the British were realizing that they can't have this kind of victories anymore because of all the losses that were happening. The colonists might have been outnumbered, but they were making smart decisions by a great leader, George Washington. Now we're getting to chapter 14, the Great Declaration. We want to be able to understand the main arguments and effects of common sense. Okay, we want to understand and summarize the Declaration of Independence, and then, as always, be able to understand our core chapter vocabulary. Remember to do the big question discussion post. Please do not copy and paste your answer for the big discussion post. Please use your own words, and then also use the definitions from the book for your vocabulary words. Please don't copy and paste a definition from Google. Use the definition inside the book. All right, so let's think about the things that Great Britain has done to the colonies over the years. Right, they've been putting a lot of taxes on the Americans to try to show who's in control, and the colonists haven't really enjoyed that. And now, because of this, the colonists have started to become more united, united colonies, become Americans, and they're realizing that they do need to separate from their mother country, Great Britain. So we're going to read about two documents that influenced the opinions and changed the minds of the colonists. And one was the pamphlet called Common Sense, and the second is the Declaration of Independence. So let's call our attention to the big question. What was the Declaration of Independence? And some of you guys probably already know, because Hozho is awesome and teaches you a lot of these founding documents about our founding fathers. Gives you a lot of classical education, right? The great things that have built this great country. But as we read, let's look for answers to help us understand what was the Declaration of Independence. Let's start reading and follow along with me. All right. Okay, sorry. All right, start reading with me, Joshua. Coming to a decision. By the start of 1776, the argument with Great Britain had lasted more than 10 years. The fighting had gone on for almost one. Still, many colonists weren't sure whether they really wanted independence. A number of colonists opposed independence. These people were called Loyalists. So let's pause and read this with me, Yandine. Or Sunny. So what is the definition of a loyalist? A person living in the colonies who did not support the American cause and remained loyal to Great Britain. So there were some colonists that didn't want independence. They wanted to stay attached to the mother country of Great Britain. Loyalists belonged to different religions and came from different social classes. Okay, so were they rich or were they poor? What social class were they from? Were they from educated classes? Were they from uneducated families? So they had different reasons for their loyalty. Some loyalists made their decision for economic reasons. Some chose the British side for political reasons. Others followed religious or personal values. But all loyalists agreed on one thing. They need to stay faithful to the king and to Great Britain. No colony had ever broken away from a mother country. Giving up a place in the world's greatest empire and all the advantages of being part of it, was that really a smart idea? Great Britain was the world's greatest empire at that time, and they had a lot of advantages, right? So would it be smart to separate from them? On the other hand, patriots argued, shouldn't the colonists defend their rights and liberties? It was a very tough decision. So be a part of the greatest empire, but lose some of your rights as, a human being, right? Some of the rights that this country was founded upon. This is what these people are already realizing. Or lose your ties with the mother country, but have the rights and liberties that, humans should have, that these people know that they deserve. Let's look at this picture of Thomas Paine and read its caption. So Thomas Paine, a 29-year-old English immigrant, helped to persuade many colonists that the time for independence had arrived. So we're going to learn about this, Thomas Paine, and how he played a role. Okay, so the decision became easier after Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense. Okay, what is a pamphlet? Precious, what does that definition say? A small booklet that includes information or ideas about a single topic. So you guys have probably seen pamphlets if you've gone to probably at the store or at the doctor's, or sometimes amusement parks have pamphlets about different rides. Usually they're kind of fold up into thirds, and you kind of unfold two flaps and you open it up. That's what a pamphlet looks like. So Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet that was called Common Sense. Paine had a great and rare skill. He could write about important ideas in everyday language. If you could read at all, you could understand common sense. So he wasn't speaking at kind of like this scholarly level. He was kind of speaking to everybody, a language that anybody, if you could read, could understand. Paine's pamphlet was read throughout the colonies. People talked about it in their homes, on street corners, and in taverns and inns. So the everyday person, whether you were, rich or poor, educated or not very well educated, as long as you could read, you could understand what he wrote, and these people were talking about this. A lot of what Paine wrote was in fact plain common sense. He got readers to think about his ideas, not just by telling them what he thought, but also by asking what he thought, but asking what they thought. Did it make sense for America to be ruled by a small nation 3,000 miles away? Did it make sense for people to be ruled by one man, a king, just because he was born into a certain family? Wouldn't it be better if the colonists chose their own rulers? Right? A big part was the taxation without representation. They had no representation. They weren't able to vote who could represent them, who knew what they needed, their struggles, their goals, their ambitions as, colonists. And then as Americans, they wanted people that was a part of them. So Paine said that it was common sense for Americans to cut all ties to Great Britain. It was common sense for Americans to be independent and a great government of their own. Americans didn't need a king. They could live in a land where the law is king. All right. Checking my notes really quick. All right. Continue to read. The more they thought about it, the more Americans agreed. They didn't need the parliament and the king to rule them. They had plenty of experience in choosing their own leaders and ruling themselves. Perhaps it really was time then to separate and go on their way. Okay, so now after common sense, people are realizing, yes, we need to be independent. We know what's right for us. Like, we're over here. We shouldn't be ruled by someone that is, like they said, 3,000 miles away, that doesn't know the struggles, doesn't know what it's like to be over here in the colonies. We can choose our leaders, people that we, can represent us and help us out. So these people are gathering together. People are in support of this. And so now we get to the Declaration of Independence. So in June 1776, the Second Continental Congress took up the question of independence. Congress agreed that the time had come to separate from Great Britain. The Congress chose a committee to write a declaration or statement. So the purpose of the declaration was to explain why the colonies were breaking away from Great Britain. here is a picture of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence formally announced the colonists' separation from Great Britain. So the committee chosen to write the Declaration included John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. Which committee member should do the main writing? Benjamin Franklin and George Washington were probably the two most famous Americans alive. Remember, George Washington was a well-respected general in the colonial militia. So John Adams was one of the first leaders to speak out in favor of independence. Thomas Jefferson, however, was known as a fine writer. Franklin and Adams chose him to write the Declaration. So what Jefferson produced became the most famous document not only in American history, but also in the history of the entire world. Jefferson wanted the world to know all the bad things this king had done and all the rights he had taken away. So he listed each of them. He also explained why the king's actions made it right for the colonists to break away from Britain. Okay, so we're about to read a word called endowed. So let's read this together, Jasmine. What does the endow mean? To give someone something valuable. All right. So let's see what was endowed. What was the something or the someone that was giving something valuable? We hold these truths to be self-evident, and I know some of you guys could probably recite this with me, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, the Creator, their Creator, gave them, the colonists or humans, Americans, He endowed them with these unalienable rights. All men, right? So all men have these unalienable rights. And the valuable things are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jefferson also stated that to secure these rights, governments are instituted or created. Okay, so institute, read this with me. Santino. What does institute mean? To establish or start something. So governments are established or started. In other words, the reason we have governments is to protect our rights. So our governments are to help protect our rights, right? Those unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So what if a government doesn't protect those rights? What if it takes them away? Then said Jefferson, people have the right to create new governments for themselves. That's what the people of the 13 colonies were now doing. So the Parliament was trying to take away these rights, and so them as humans, as people, had the rights to separate themselves and create a new government that would protect those rights. On July 4th, 1776, Congress adopted this Declaration of Independence. On that day, the American colonies became independent states. Together, they made up the United States of America. Today, Americans celebrate July 4th as their Independence Day. So during the next month, in towns and cities across the states, crowds gathered to hear the Declaration of Independence read aloud. Everywhere in the new United States of America, church bells rang out. Soldiers fired cannons and shot off guns. Citizens lit great bonfires in celebration. Meanwhile, back in Philadelphia, the delegates to the Second Continental Congress were more serious. The 56 men who signed the Declaration knew that if their revolution failed, the king would probably put them to death. Okay, scroll back up. Revolution. What is a revolution? Let's read this. Troy. Read this with me, Troy. The act of overthrowing a government with the hopes of starting a new one and a different one. So I was just watching Star Wars, right? And Star Wars have the First Order. I'm watching the last 3. And the First Order is trying to control people. And the resistance is realizing that they're trying to take away their rights. They're trying to do things that are not good. And so they're starting their own revolution and to resist the First Order, right? So these 56 men back in Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress, those members realized that if this, resistance, this change of revolution, of breaking away failed, the king would probably put them to death. Benjamin Franklin explained the need for all the new states to work together. This is what he said: "Gentlemen, we must all hang together, or else we shall all hang separately." Meaning, come together, work together, make this work, or we're going to actually hang for going against the British Empire, their mother country. So that is it for chapter 14. Give you some hints and tips for your big question answer. So what was the Declaration of Independence? So it was a statement by the Second Continental Congress explaining what was happening with the colonies. What was the purpose of the Declaration? What did the colonies want to do? And what was it saying that they were going to do in the Declaration? It also said the bad things that the British government had done to the colonists. And it was talking about how all people were guaranteed what? Some rights, right? What were those rights that they have that the British government was trying to take away or not protect? So that is it for our lesson. Thanks for joining me. I will see you guys in the next lesson.